I love a packed house. This is great. And I love an excited audience, even better. It's even better. Welcome, everybody. I'm David Kratz. I am the president and, more importantly, a graduate of the New York Academy of Art. And I have been looking forward to this night for months now. I'm so really excited that it's finally here and that all of you turned out. It's a night that means a lot to us at the school because it brings together much of what the Academy stands for. It's about figurative painting. It's about artists with a deep sense of community, purpose, and fellowship. It's about the sharing and the transfer of knowledge. And it's about damn good painting writ large, very large. The idea for the show started with its curators, Bo Bartlett, Noah Buchanan, and Carl Dobsky. And it was first exhibited at the Columbus State University in Georgia, at the Bo Bartlett Center. When that team contacted us about having the show come here, I had to say yes immediately, mostly because there's so many graduates of the Academy in the show, or teachers of the Academy in the show, and also because the rest of the artists who were not falling into those categories were people whose work I truly loved. My only concern was that it wouldn't actually fit. And it did, surprisingly enough, but it probably looks like it really fills the room when it's here, unlike the Bo Bartlett Center. We do have size envy. It's a much bigger, sort of soaring space, but this is New York, and we are thrilled to have this kind of space at all. So we did have to actually take Bo's painting apart, though, to get it through the doors and get it, and then re-hang it when it got in here, reframe it. So. But I think it looks like it's meant for this room, and we're just delighted to have it. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I actually have to introduce the people on the stage. And I don't want to take up allotted time for the panel, the meat of the evening, with long introductions. So I'm going to skip the list of prizes, publications, and prestigious collections and institutions that they're all in. I don't have to tell you how good these people are. You wouldn't be here if you didn't already know that. And if you have any doubts, just look around you. You can see it for yourself. So here's what we're going to do. It's going to be audience participation, because I have always secretly wanted to be an NPR host. We are going to play a game. I'm going to give you a clue that is from either their bio, their artist statement, or, I don't know, reference material. And you're going to tell me who the artist is. All right? And I think on Wait, Don't Tell Me, they give you a free recording on your answering machine. So I'll do that, too. I'll arrange that, too. Okay, so this artist is also a radio show host. He looks at America's heart, its land, and its people, and describes the beauty he finds in everyday life. Who am I talking about? All right, yes. All right. Welcome, Bo. All right, this artist often uses roofing tar instead of paint. And, okay, you got it. Vince Desiderio. I was also going to say his painting Sleep was used as the basis for a Kanye West video. This artist, okay, they're going to get a little harder now. Those were 2 giveaways just to warm up the crowd. This artist uses the grandeur of Renaissance and Baroque composition to, what? Nope. To make a series of paintings staged at home, in the backyard, and at her pool, featuring family and friends packed together, bright colors, toy signs. Zoey Frank! Yes. Welcome, Zoey. Okay, this artist grew up in Columbus, Georgia, and was the first woman to receive the grand prize from the National Portrait Gallery Portrait Competition. Welcome, Amy. Okay, I'm going to ratchet it up again. This artist presents issues of the contemporary world, cast in a Baroque sensibility. Carl. I didn't even get to finish. You're well known. Carl Dobsky. Carl is one of the moderators for tonight's panel also. And then this person may have had a dream of becoming an artist when he attended the New York Academy of Art, and his painting is based on a famous biblical dream. Who am I talking about? Noah Buchanan, yes. Thank you, Noah. Okay, without further ado, I turn it over to our moderators, Noah Buchanan and Carl Dobsky. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Just a quick, huge thank you to the New York Academy of Art for hosting this iteration of the exhibition, and specifically David Kratz, Dean Peter Drake, and Director of Exhibitions Heidi Elbers. Oh, that's a shame. So with that, we want to maximize our time with the discussion, and I think Carl's going to ask the first question. You want me to go first? Okay. All right. So, Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike's always there when you need him. To begin, the concept for this exhibition began about 7 years ago in conversations between Bo Bartlett, Carl Dobsky, and myself, and our interest in creating the show was clear from the first. An exhibition focusing on works which are narrative, figurative, and large in scale, hence the title of this exhibition, Big Stories. Can you each talk about, one, the need to tell these stories of human experience through paint, and two, how does the use of large scale play into this experience? And I'd like to ask Amy to start for us. And
Why don't you love me? Why are you going to make me go first?
It's because I heard you say something really poignant about this issue. So, but of course, this is going to be an equally balanced conversation, so let it be organic from there.
So why big paintings?
Well, two parts. The need to tell these stories of human experience through paint, and how does the use of large scale play into the experience?
I think for me, it started with, specifically needing to tell my story, and the bigger stories would be the bigger canvases, and I think I connected to my inspiration of cinematography and movies. When people ask me what inspires me, I don't often think about paintings. I think about scenes that I've seen in movies, and so it's like almost an opportunity to become a director of this composition, of this moment, to tell this story. It's what do you call it? It's like the log line in a script. And I also remember there was a documentary that was really popular on Netflix that came out about 5 years ago. And they were interviewing different art world people, collectors, and gallery directors and whatnot. And they spoke about artists that make big work, and that sometimes they make it just because of their ego and not because the work necessarily needed it. And so that resonated with me, so I waited a long time because I was like, I'm not sure if it's like the right moment to take my work from like this smaller scale to a larger scale. So I waited for the right moment and the right painting and the right time, so I felt like that it was useful. And I think it's really important for me it was important because I imagined my work on the walls of museums, and being in a place like that, I wanted to take up as much space as I possibly could. Not for like the negative reasons that might sound kind of funny to say that, but because I'm like, if I'm gonna be here, then I wanna be here, and I wanna leave a stamp, and something that could live as long as the cave paintings do that I grew up looking at, and so for me, that's what really touched me about this exhibition, and also just being able to paint these large pieces. Thank you, Papa.
When I was 18, I went to Florence, and I didn't know much about art at all. I just wound up in Florence. I'd read My Name is Asher Lev behind Potok, and so I went to Florence because that's what the character did, the fictional character Asher Lev did. But when I was there, for the first time, I saw the big paintings. I saw the Botticellis and paintings like that. and I was studying with Ben Long, who was an American, who was studying with Pietro Annigoni, and they were doing these large fresco paintings. So from the very beginning, to my mind, what a serious painter did large paintings. So it really sort of clicked in from the very beginning that if you're going to be serious, you do large paintings. But I think that in terms of like why continue, there's just a different relationship to the painting itself if it's if it's life size or larger. Than if it's diminutive and you can sort of hide it away on a wall somewhere and the figures are small. It's just a very different relationship in the viewing. So I really like for it to be immersive so that as the viewer you can be one with the painting.
I feel like for me there's also a part of, as the painter, kind of a different experience of embodiment when I'm working on a large scale. Of my relationship to the figures in the painting, and that when I'm working on a large-scale painting, I'm working with my whole body, and there's like more of me going into the painting somehow. I'm like viscerally engaged with these figures that are kind of talking back to me as if they were almost alive, and that I'm using my whole body to make these big strokes feels very different than working on a small-scale kind of delicate thing. And for me, I'm kind of trying to get as much of myself into the painting, as much energy into the painting, so hopefully some of that can kind of push back, and the viewers can get some of that energy kind of emanating back out of the painting, I guess. And for me, it's easier to do that, I think, when I'm working on those larger paintings.
Yeah, once you've done a large painting, it's just almost impossible to go back and do a small painting. I mean,
This is
everything
true.
smaller
That's true.
just seems unimportant. You're only doing the real work when you're doing the big paintings.
I really agree with and relate to what everyone has said in regard to doing large paintings. In regard to the stories, though, I think, and for me it's always been this way, is that there is one large narrative that is flawed, but it simply is because it was and we can't change it, and that's the narrative of the history of painting. And as artists, we kind of create protagonists that enter into the stage during our time. We create protagonists into the history. And to think of it that way is a good way of thinking it because it includes everything. So Carl Andre, who I think died just today, created a protagonist that took the story of the history of art along with his fellow minimalists in a certain direction. And so for me, the story that I most relate to is that story. And for me, I made the paintings really giant when I moved to New York because I wanted to come out with a sword in my hand and saying that the narrative, this narrative of the history of art is moving in a different direction. And that's why I did it, and that's the narrative that's most important to me.
Yeah, maybe say some of the rest of you guys could say a little bit more about the narrative part of your work and sort of the need to be a narrative artist or the interest in being one.
I think in some ways for me it was just growing up in the South. The storytelling is a big part of life. Everything is portrayed through stories. It's relayed through stories. It's like sermons in church, all the sort of biblical stories. They're all, and so I think storytelling is a big part of the Southern tradition, and I feel like that when I first started making paintings, it wasn't just the physical act of making the painting, but it was the desire to be involved in some sort of storytelling that had a universal aspect. Like I grew up looking at Norman Rockwell and stuff like that, which is very, very narrative. Sort of one-hit narrative sometimes, but you get it, you look at it, and you know the story right away. And that's, it can be limiting, but it's also extremely challenging to figure out how to do that.
I mean, is my microphone still on? Sorry, you're painting. I tell a story all the time, but like I saw Beau's painting and knew that I wanted to make narrative paintings after I saw his work, after I saw Object Permanence. And I think I didn't start making work thinking about narrative, but I feel like my first 2 or 3 years of paintings were really like journaling my past and my history and like working out who I was, because I had moved back to Columbus, Georgia as a grown person, and it just triggered a lot of things that I felt like I needed to work out when it came down to like my identity as a Southerner, as a Black woman, and then also the obvious absence of a narrative of Black figuration in our history. I feel like figuration is very important, and for that reason, I remember watching a talk with Kerry James Marshall, and in that talk he specified that the difference between the work that figuration does when it's work made by an artist of color is very different than abstraction, because it's literally leaving a mark and leaving a narrative and telling a story, which is really important because those stories have been untold. But I think for me it was my personal story in the beginning and working out what it meant to be from where I was from, and traveling and going to different places in the world and experiencing different people, different religions, which, you know, growing up in Columbus is like you grow up really sheltered, and I went to a Catholic school. I didn't have a lot of friends. My parents were a part of a church that was like considered a cult now. So like I just had this weird upbringing, and so like there were things that I needed to work out, and then once I worked through that, it opened up to a broader narrative that you're seeing now in the work.
I think for me, the narrative kind of comes second. Like I'm thinking about, I guess I like fell in love with Renaissance painting and these big like religious multiple figure scenes. That was what made me want to be a painter. I love seeing figures, and just it's about like the flesh and like the way the fabric is painted and the arrangements of these like groups of people into pyramids and circles, and kind of the like the abstract elements of those representational paintings that I love more than whatever kind of religious scene that happens to be. So my paintings actually kind of start more with like, I want to get figures together in space, and then I need a way to justify it. And there's no way for narrative to then not kind of come into the work. Like I have to kind of create a story to justify making the painting I want to make. And then as the painting evolves, I'm like, oh, now I have these two people, and they're starting to look at each other, and maybe this is the mother, and this is the, you know, her grown daughter, or what, you know, they kind of like, there's kind of sub-stories that then kind of unfold as I build the painting. But I don't go in with like a strong story that I want to tell. They kind of unfold into narratives, I guess.
That I think is especially interesting, because what seems to have happened in the early part of the 1400s is that all of a sudden in Western painting, in Western culture, painting just blossomed. Something happened. It germinated, and it took root, and it started. And it all starts at that moment. And so I always ask myself, what is it that was happening at that time that would have done that? What was happening philosophically? What was happening, you know, in terms of literature, in terms of, and concomitantly in the minds of visual thinkers. And the thing that's most interesting is that, and so we go to museums, we go through Italy, and we see one nativity after another, one crucifixion after another, and another, and then you realize that it has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the subject. It's a language that was created as a kind of rhetorical blossoming around the idea. And that rhetorical blossoming, you know, rhetoric became very important for the humanists as opposed to the medieval thinkers. That rhetorical blossoming was suited for the visual imagination, you know? And it's kind of filled a void between what was physic and what was metaphysical. You know, that they kept arguing about how do you reconcile metaphysics with the Aristotelian physics? How do you do this? And they couldn't do it. And suddenly, all of a sudden, there's this moment where painting comes to fill that gap as a third branch of intellectual inquiry, you know? And that's why narrative paintings, to me, are always built, the narrative is built into the technique. It's the technical narrative that tells the story. We don't go and look at the Dutch painters, right? The little Dutch masters, right? And you look at Ter Borch and Jan Steen and people like that, and they look like little Dutch people in little Dutch rooms doing like little Dutch things, right? And then you look at Vermeer, and you go, well, it's a little Dutch person in a little Dutch room doing something like little Dutch people did, but it doesn't look like those other paintings. And the reason we look at it, the reason is we can't get to the bottom of why he made the decisions he did. They all used the camera obscura, so it wasn't really that at all. Why did he choose to paint the effect of the lens? What does that mean? That's where the narrative of his work really is. Not in, gee, what is she reading in that letter?
But in some ways, though, the story was always an important impetus to it. I mean, like the cave paintings, the Lascaux, the cave paintings. It was about the herd, or about the hunting, or the fighting, and other early paintings. So, in some ways, the impetus was always to tell some version of a story. I mean, and then the form sort of came out of that.
Yeah, but they were cavemen. Or ladies, right? Probably were ladies.
Since you, is this on? Yeah. Since you guys are already sort of drifting into that territory, I think I'll go ahead and go with the second question, because you're already kind of moving that direction anyway. It seems that narrative painting can exist in a range between a sort of poetic metaphor or just like a descriptive documentary. And some artists even claim that the work is narrative simply just because they decide it is, even though the common understanding doesn't really think that it is narrative. Could you guys discuss the strengths and the limitation of open-ended narratives versus a more like precise, concise, focused narrative? It says here I'm supposed to ask you, Vince, but anybody can take this question if you want.
I don't want to talk too much, so why doesn't someone else start off?
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll go, but you want to go? I mean, from my point of view, it has to be open-ended narrative. It has to be. I mean, anything else is, propaganda. Anything else is didactic and illustrative. I mean, if it's not open-ended, then it's just, it's almost like just adhering to a text of some sort, like illustration.
Could I press you on that a little bit? Would you consider Norman Rockwell to be a sort of propaganda or didactic?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally didactic.
Okay.
So, I mean, for me, part of the idea is that you continue to engage the viewer over a long period of time as they're trying to figure out what the heck they're looking at. So it's open-ended so that it has a long shelf life.
I don't...
Go ahead.
I don't
Go.
Well, I agree with him, and and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is is because if paintings or if visual thinking is an impetus for or an inspiration for thought, for rational thought, because painting has rational components to it, definitely, but it's definitely very much rooted in sensation. And we're almost thinking with our senses as we're doing it. And in the old days, they used to say that an idea could only be occur to the mind with an image preceding it, that the image precedes the rational structures that based on it. So if you're making a painting whose goal is to inspire that, then you don't want to close it off into a fait accompli, right? You want to keep it ready to germinate, right? And the other thing that's interesting is that, and I've told my students this, is that the difference between the way a painter conjures something and the way an illustrator conjures something is that, they both start off with a basic feeling or sense of what they want to do, and they start moving the ball in the direction of the painting. Well, the illustrator knows that he or she has to arrive at a terminus, right? And the painter, as we are definitely moving towards some kind of terminus, recognizes the terminus as something fatal. And so we splay we splay the arrows so that they will miss the mark, and they keep going. But if you look at the model this way, then you see that as they're passing, the terminus then becomes the inception. So what's in the beginning is what's in the end, and what's in the end is in the beginning. It's a kind of very fluid, but very rich sort of way of presenting information that will be useful for other people, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, I guess. And just thinking about, like, I don't know, wanting to kind of go into the painting, I want to go in feeling like I'm kind of exploring something and not having something that's kind of pre-solved, so that there's this sense of investigation and something kind of unfolding and being discovered through the course of making the painting. And hopefully arriving at something that's much more, for me, I arrive at something that's much more complex and can hold a lot more in it than if I kind of have something that's fully pre-planned and I'm executing it. And what I would think about more is kind of like illustrating an idea with a kind of closed narrative, trying to hold more of like the complexity of being human and being in the world and all of that, I guess, in making the paintings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also about capturing the moment so that you don't know what happened before and you don't know what's going to happen after. I think that's where you hold the power.
I'm going to keep going with that for just a little bit more. Do you guys ever think, so open-ended narratives hold a lot of potential because the viewer can kind of develop along with it. They can kind of interpret it in the way, and it's not sort of like propagandist or didactic, as you were saying. But do you think there's a point where it can become so open-ended that it's like an open that it just sort of falls apart? And is there ever a danger? Do you ever think of that as a danger, or do you just sort of like boldly go wherever it goes, like Captain Kirk and?
I don't know. I think we all, are good painters because we also know how to listen to our intuition. And I think that's the most important part of your practice, is like knowing when to stop and knowing when to let that question be open-ended, so like you don't go off the cliff.
And personally, I don't want to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't want to alienate the viewer. I mean, I really want to sort of engage the viewer. So, is it Malcolm Gladwell that has the concept of Maya, M-A-Y-A, make it accessible yet advanced? So you want to make it accessible first, so that at least you have got them to engage. But if you've gone too far and gone off the cliff, they might not even engage. So, I mean, maybe that's a populist concept. But anyway, the idea is to like get them engaged somehow first, and then wake them up, then kick them.
Well, when a painter makes something, as far as I'm concerned, the painter is making it with an amazing cunning. It's not so. There's much more cunning involved in it than like the lie through which the truth is revealed, as Picasso said. It's that you keep it open-ended, but it's not like open-ended like whoa, anything's possible. It's open-ended in a direction that is going to hit a mark and inspire the kinds of thinking that you hope will happen as a result of it. So it's really, but you have to construct it in a way, in a cunning way that sucks the viewer into it, and at the same time sort of gives them a.
Yeah, it's a question. It's a question, not an answer.
Would it be fair to sort of paraphrase that as a good story has to have a sense of mystery or suspense in it, and it can't have all of the light shining everywhere, showing every little crack? Would that be something along the same lines, or no? Yeah. Okay.
I'm thinking of two paintings that are pretty closed narrative that are both really successful, and we all know them. So I'm thinking of Raft of the Medusa by Géricault and the Joan of Arc painting by Jules Bastien Lepage in the Met here, which I think both of those in the narratives very closed, and yet somehow they have an openness to them. But talk about why those paintings are so successful, narrative paintings, but they're closed, or are they closed?
Well, I mean, we know the story, but I mean, the question is, does it work if we don't know the story? So, I mean, I think Raft of Medusa, we don't have to know the history, that it's sort of illustrating. It is a powerful work without that history. And I think that's one of the important parts. Does it transcend the initial, text or source or whatever?
I have to confess that when I first saw the Raft of the Medusa, I didn't know what the story was, and it was the painting pulled me, and I actually learned about what had happened from the painting.
And I think in that painting also we have these kind of like dead bodies in the foreground going back into the depth of the painting, and there's like hope on the far distant horizon with this boat that might save them, and the figures are kind of looking back into the space. So it's more than just like that there were people on a raft and this thing happened. It's like also about, there's like something more profound about like this, I don't know, kind of going from despair back into the space of hope. That I think it's actually much more open-ended, and it's holding more. It's a bigger story than just that specific moment that it's depicting.
Yeah, there's also it's a story not just about the raft, but it's a story about the particular moment historically at the cusp of Romanticism. In painting, you have this raft. Now, in the painting there are really two very strong triangles. One is the triangle of the people, and with the black fellow at the top, at the apex of it, signaling to the boat. But the other one is the mast and the rope that's taking the raft that way when they want to go that way. So in a sense, it's really about, we are at a point, an inflection point, as Joe Biden likes to say. My dad always used to say, oh, sorry.
You guys were sort of heading down this road. Actually, Vince kind of opened this up, so let's delve into it just officially. But thinking about issues of craft and process, and I think that a lot of people in this room will appreciate this question because I know there's loads of painters here with us. But thinking about how these can play into the overall message of the work. An example could be how chiaroscuro lighting of Caravaggio or Spanish tenebrism symbolizes the sublime and the horrible, or how transparency versus opacity in the paint could symbolize things like subconscious and consciousness. Those are just some random examples that I'm giving, but do the formal aspects of your painting convey narrative meaning in your work? For example, how do the composition, color relationships, paint application relate to the subject matter in your painting? How do you make these choices? And I'd like to throw this over to Zoey to open it up.
Oh no, this was the question I asked. I wanted to hear other people talk about it, not have to answer it
you get to lead us now.
I was kind of asking part of that question. I feel like it's really, I'm hoping in my paintings to have them be connected. And I guess as I was saying before, I don't have a clear sense of the story that I'm wanting to tell, so I think it kind of unfolds a little bit intuitively how I get there. But in the painting here, I think there is this sense of like, this is a summer day, and it's really like I kind of have the colors are bright and it's sun-drenched, and I've kind of blown out the lights a little bit on the figures, and I'm thinking about these kind of connections between the figures, wanting them to be like filling up the whole space and really pushing against each other. So I've made all the figures kind of as big as they can possibly be in that painting, and are kind of connected almost by these kind of abstract breaks in the light, which I think is kind of connecting one figure to the next rather than having them be kind of as much separate, kind of separate entities. We're kind of following different pathways through the painting rather than looking at each figure individually. And I think that kind of becomes part of the narrative of what that painting is about, I guess. Does that?
I just want to take a moment to just honor that painting. And it is such an incredible painting.
I agree.
Thank you. That's very sweet. Thank you.
So, yeah, Vince, why don't you talk about the process related to the content?
Well, that's what, when we talk about the technical narrative, there are certain things, it's really a discussion that has not really happened. People talk about style, and they talk about the materials that the old masters used, and how do you learn how to draw, and it's usually not by copying French academic work. But embedded in techniques, there are real suggestions of meaning. For example, when we look at chiaroscuro, like you said, it happens on the heels with Caravaggio. It happens on the heels of mannerism. So what you had in the Quattrocento was this development of a very clear rationale, and for them it was a clear rationale for the flight of the soul to the ineffable one. Therefore, it was definitely rooted in Neoplatonism. I promised I would not mention Neoplatonism, but there you go. Okay, but here's the thing: is that it's all based on the sort of orthogonals and traversals leading to a singular point in perspective. Now, what happens with mannerism is that notion of the clarity with which the soul can access the ineffable one, starts to crumble under the weight of Michelangelo's angst. Right? Mannerism's born. But when it comes back with Caravaggio, what you have is a kind of analog for the vanishing point, but it projects out of the picture. It's actually the focal point of the incidence of reflection. The instance of reflection, which also favors the monocular vision, like the one-point perspective. So the light strikes it, it hits back at the one. So it's that when we look at tenebrism and we look at especially Caravaggio and Ribera, it's very much rooted in the sort of access to the sublime. Or not sublime, the ineffable one through a corridor that speaks to infinity, that recognizes that there is an infinite point of perspective, and that they believed the speed of light was infinite, But then, later, one could say that the development of scumble over glaze, right? We can start to see it, and look at like Ribera's later work. All of a sudden, he starts lightening his palette. You look at the Clubfoot Boy, and it's a painting that's sort of caked, with the paint caked on in a kind of scumble. So what's happening is that the painting is moving away from the sort of, the tenebrism of the early Baroque and moving in a direction that eventually arrives at what we like the paintings in 2001 in Space Odyssey, when the pod arrives in the room. All the paintings are these paintings from Baroque, Rococo paintings and paintings from the Age of Enlightenment. And there's this verdigris that is a color that you see always often in painting from the Age of Enlightenment. Early Goya even has it in the background. And it's a color that you get, if you take a glaze that's warm and you put a scumble over it, it turns it into a bluish. And then if you glaze over that, it becomes greenish. So there's a sort of an evolution to verdigris in the Age of Enlightenment that becomes a kind of a symbolic reference to enlightenment, to the Enlightenment. And then when you see it later in people like Max Beckmann in his painting The Night, or in de Kooning's Excavation, which he said was based on seeing bodies seeing photographs of bodies, mass graves covered with lye. That all of a sudden that the idea of something that was once a clarifying pictorial gesture becomes an obfuscation, right? And you see it in Beckmann and then you see it in also, Malievich's White on White, and Robert Ryman more recently, and people like that.
Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to. And so I think similar to Bo and Amy, I think of two different things. Bo, you use underpaintings that you work up from earth tones. Amy, you're using grisaille to paint the flesh tones. I mean, how do these things play into the meanings in your content?
Well, I just want to respond to Vince, because I think that when we used to paint together back in the day, back in Philadelphia, Vince would be over there working in his studio, and he'd be working on this big giant painting, and he would get it to a certain point and say, "You get the idea," And I think that's the point. When you get it to that point where you get the idea, anything else is superfluous. So the technique or the style or whatever is really about, the expression.
Yeah, but I should have finished some of those things.
Sorry, Amy,
It's all good. So I guess for me, it was a way for me to keep my work, like having gray skin tone or painting in grisaille was a way for me to not have the work be marginalized. I think, I appreciate seeing it in a room like this. It's just a work about figuration, right? Like, and I think I just wanted to be in a room where I wasn't gonna be marginalized and put in a corner, and the work was specifically gonna be about that one thing. And so it wasn't a plan that I don't, like you, like I don't go into my studio with words in my head. Like every composition is worked out based on intuition and feeling and, so many other things. But the words come after, and I realized maybe 3 years after I had been painting in that way that I had anxiety about producing work because my work in graduate school was different. Like, I call it my Sarah McLachlan phase, and it was like, bald-headed. It was very Odd Nerdrum. Like, I went to live and study with Odd Nerdrum for a summer, so it was not quite like his work, but like the same kind of feeling. And you didn't know who painted it. So like I was almost anonymous as a black woman painter because you couldn't tell that I was the one that was doing, that it was a black person making these paintings. And then all of a sudden I'm making work about black people, and I'm like, okay, now everybody's gonna know that it's a black artist making work about black people. And I felt like they were gonna force, whoever they is, they were gonna force the conversation to be solely about identity. And I was in the process of exploring and like opening myself up to the world, like leaving behind the ways that I was raised and the things that I was taught to believe and how I was told to speak about myself and my identity, and trying to figure some things out. So taking the color out of it was a way for me to do that without being didactic, because I didn't want to be didactic. And my whole body of work was based on two experiences. One was watching the movie Big Fish, and the other one was leaving an exhibition of Kara Walker's work at the Whitney and trying to figure out how to fit the magic into the history, because that's there too, and I had not seen that painted yet. So it was a way for me to do that. But when I was in Europe this summer, I was looking at, his name begins with a D, I'm having a brain fart. No, no, like, yeah, Degas, right? Like, I think it was Degas, yeah. I know, I should know, but all you guys are looking at me, it makes me nervous, okay? So, it might have been Caravaggio, it might have been somebody, but anyway, I realized that I was kind of doing the same thing because it was like, dark backgrounds and light skin, and I have like a colorful background with the dark skin, so it was just like, the reverse of that. And I just thought that was interesting.
What you're saying reminds me of a good friend of mine who was my student for many, many years, Ark Niles. And Ark, I had many tearful conversations with Ark, the first paintings he showed me were copies of Caravaggio, and that he wanted to paint this tenebrism and with this white flesh, but sometimes he would put himself in there, and then he would get confused about the whole issue, and yet he wanted to be so much, and he was, and he is, a part of this tradition of painting, this great Western tradition of painting. He's adding a new dimension to it, like you are, like we all are. And during that time, I had a dream that really disturbed me. And it was that I was teaching a class, and I was talking about heightening with white. I was talking about building the form by organizing the tonal structure of the light that you're adding. And in the dream, there was a black guy sitting in the front, and he looked at me, and he looked like there was something wrong. And I said, what's wrong? This is my dream. He said, your whole notion of this technique is predicated upon a white Western bias. That was my dream. That's great. And I went, holy shit, he's right. So the next day, I was like, and I really, that's a very important part of the technical narrative, of understanding the technical narrative and its pitfalls as well. So I'm in class the next day, and I'm going around the class, and there's a black guy in the class, and he's got his palette there. And I say to him, what's that color there? And he goes, no, it's this one. It's flesh ochre. I said, that's not your flesh. So I was, but you know, this is a very real thing, and it's embedded in the technical narrative. You know, reach inside of it, you know, and tweak it from the inside, and that's what you're doing, and that's what ARC is doing, and I think it's amazing, important.
If we cut this right now, we can have about 10 minutes of time that I'd like to invite our audience to pose questions to the panel. I know that... questions? Okay, oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me good? Okay. I'm really moved to hear you talk about this because I'm somebody who outwardly is like racially ambiguous. People look at me and they think I'm Persian or just Caucasian, Italian, whatever, you know, but you know, oh, awesome, thank you. Can you hear me though, that one? Awesome. And so when I'm going into making paintings now, I just graduated from Laguna College of Art and Design, and I'm thinking about making paintings like this, multi-figure, and really trying to connect with the human experience on all levels. I really end up finding myself combating with that notion of, are you allowed to make this? Are people going to understand this? Are they going to look at it and think that it's cliche, or that it's, of course, you would make something like this, and how maybe you would give me advice to go past that and to kind of rise above those notions, because it seems like you all have a pretty good idea of maybe how to move forward with a complex narrative.
You just have to push forward. I mean, there's so many insecurities that you're just going to have, and you know, I have a very busy little voice in my head that likes to make me feel like I'm not good enough all the time. But you have to know where the wealth is in the knowledge that you have and what you want to put out in the world, and figure out what's important to you. It has to be what's important to you, and if it's important to you, it's going to be important to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. We all have our own story, and what's important is for you to tell your story. You know, and be brave enough to tell that story, regardless of whatever else the heck is going on in the world, because that story needs to be told. And when you tell it honestly and truthfully, then it'll have a universal, you know, and other people will get it. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of variables that we don't know about yet, things that, you know, so. There are a lot of variables that we don't know. As an artist, you want to try to learn you want to have every basis covered. You want to have all the bases covered. You want to understand what you're painting, but there are things that are going to change in the future that are going to change the context for it. So, but you just have to try to think those through best you can, so you can understand the larger context of it, and then tell your story. And that's true for all of us. I mean, that's all we can do is.
I mean, like, everything is a cliche right now at this point. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to do it.
You know, but there are things you can do as an artist. Like, you know, that artists always do certain things, like a mirror. You have the mirror and look at your work in the mirror. That's one of the early ones that Da Vinci talked about. But there are all sorts of tricks we play to sort of really see what we're doing. One of the things that I do is, if I'm thinking about something and it's becoming kind of rote, more too discursive and obvious in a way, what I do is I flip the idea to its absolute opposite, even if what its opposite is absolutely abhorrent to my sensibility. And in doing that, because really the nature of its verso is that it is contained within it is everything that I was hoping to do, except in a negative fashion, and that jars my imagination so that I can actually, you know, proceed with it. And so that really helps. It's like, take your idea and then trash it by destroying your own belief, and then find your way back to the belief through painting it, you know?
But you also have to trust your inner voice and your instincts. You know, you have to trust that. And Andrew Wyeth used to say, you know, he would always keep the little sketch from the very initial concept right beside the painting all the way through, so he wouldn't like go off on a back road which leads nowhere. You know, he would keep coming back to that idea. So you have to trust that. I mean, you have to trust your instincts as artists. He also said he would disappear He would try to disappear while he was working, and I think that's crucial. You know, it's not about your ego at that point. You're actually disappearing. So it's about the work, and so you're not thinking about style or technique or anything. You're just disappearing, and it's happening in an ideal world.
And I also think about how it's in conversation with art history. I think that's the one thing that I think about, because at the end of the day, I mean, I'm going to be facetious in saying this, but at the end of the day, I'm like, I have to somehow, I feel like anyway, like make a nod to the art historical patriarchy. In order for my work to be important, I have to do like this somehow. So whenever I'm making work, I see how it is in conversation with art history, and whether it's creating some kind of tension there. And if it is, then I know I'm moving in the right direction.
Great. Can we take another question from the audience? Yeah, right here.
Thank you so much.
What is your most ecstatic moment in your work, and what is your highest goal in life?
What is your most ecstatic moment in your work and your highest goal in life?
Well, I'm always really excited when I'm starting something new and it's going to be the best painting I've ever made. And this is the one where it's all going to come together and happen. Yeah, and then I start painting, and then
Yeah, but you did.
it's downhill from there.
Yeah, but you did that.
But so then I think there's like this tremendous energy when I start the painting, and I'm like going, and then I hit a point of despair often, and the painting isn't doing what great paintings do, and I'm standing in front of it, and I'm like, this isn't what happens when I stand in front of a Titian. And there's been a couple times where I feel like I've been able to push through, and there's been a real shift in what happened, like a drastic change that I've been able to make to the work, and there's been a real like excitement that comes from pushing through that point. And that doesn't always happen, but it has happened a couple times.
Yeah, there's a point sometimes where it all time disappears, and when you literally, you know, it's the end of the day, and you've worked for 5 minutes, and you've done this incredible painting, or you've been working for 5 minutes, and you know, time just the opposite happens. What is that? Time either goes really fast or really slow, but you're in it in a way that you don't exist in time. And when that happens, you sort of know that you've got to finish painting at the end. It's like it's the way I think that, you know, the masters really were able to do all this incredible work, because they just disappeared into time and did the work and then came back on the other side, like the Sistine Chapel or something.
You know, for me, and you know, when I've done like these monster paintings, as I'm doing it, I feel like I'm in control, and that I'm like a conductor. And it's an incredibly complicated thing that I usually try to set up something that I've never done, that I can't possibly figure out, but I try. And so I keep working at it and working at it and figuring it out. And at a certain point, I feel like I'm a conductor, and there's an orchestra, and they're all like listening to me. And then all of a sudden it goes beyond that, and I can't remember painting that or that. And yet I know that they work, but I can't remember how I made it work, because I was in some kind of trance. And at that moment, like, the hair starts to stand up on the back of my neck, because I think, what the f did I do? Oh, sorry. Strike that. What the gosh begorry heck did I do? Sorry. You know, and I get like, I don't know what I did. And it's only happened maybe 5 times in my life, painting for like, you know, over 50 years. Only that. But once you experience that, it becomes you become addicted to it. The painting will fail unless you feel that, unless you feel it again. And that's and that's really exciting. I mean, God knows. And people say, "How did you do?" I don't know. I have no idea how it happened. I'm serious. I mean, it's the amalgam of many, many different decisions. You know, it's weird. It's a trance.
Yeah, it's like getting in the zone. It's the zone. You get in there, and then you get on the other side, and you're like, wow, there's a painting.
Ta-da. I always say there's studio gremlins that come in and do the work while I'm not there. For me, I think it's like when the work leaves the studio and I don't see it for a while, and I get to see it, and when I see it, like, I'm kind of like shocked that it's so good, or that it is still good, or that I did something that was good. Those are my favorite moments because I become impressed with myself, which is not something that I'm, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I'm not really prone to. So if I see it and I haven't seen it for a long time, and I'm like, oh wow, that actually is good, then those are my happy moments.
I usually have the opposite experience.
Both do happen.
Well, you guys, I think we all learned a lot. I know I did, and I'm really thankful that you all accepted our invitation to be on this panel. We're going to go ahead and end our evening now. David, is that what you're saying? Okay, good. All right. If that's okay, I would love to. Okay, so I'd like to, thanks, with permission, please, right there. Can we bring the mic to you?
I'm almost afraid to ask this, but so I went to the academy and I learned a lot about painting like this, but there was also the Diebenkorn painting that was just a mess, but it really worked. And as an artist, I had to make a decision. Do I want to stick with realism, or do I want to get that mess? And you probably went through that too, and that was like Gustin. Like, how do you navigate contemporary art where you have the skill set to paint like this, but you're looking at this other stuff? Does that ever pull you? Do you ever feel like, I just want to take a 6-inch brush out and paint the figure as a red smear? Like, how do you do that?
Totally.
I have that. There's a real misunderstanding about education, especially education where you're learning, you're fascinated with pre-modernist stuff, for example, as well as modernist stuff, and you're kind of interested in reinvestigating the language. And there's this idea that you're going to learn the tools and you're going to put them in a bag, and then you'll use them when you need them. And that is the absolute worst way to look at it. We invent our tools to do what we need to do with them. Whether we're painting abstractly or we're painting expressionistically, what we feel that needs to be at least said at that moment, we have to invent the tools to do it. We can't just simply use an old master technique to make something. I never believed that. But if you look at Diebenkorn, I love Diebenkorn, by the way. He's a great painter. But there's a painting, and this is very curious to me, there's a painting of how he loved Matisse so much. And there's a painting of an Arab girl praying, or in a courtyard, kneeling down. And if you cover the Arab girl and look at the rest of the painting, it's an Ocean Park painting. It's like, take a look at it. It's like astonishing Ocean Park. He loved Matisse. He needed to take from that tradition that he loved so much. And that's what gives his work the rigor that it has, is that it is rooted in a deep appreciation of Matisse. And if you're appreciating Matisse, then you're appreciating what Matisse was probably looking at and where he was coming from. So it goes back. But the bottom line is we invent the tools to do what we have to do. Learning to paint in a French academic way or draw in a French academic way vis-a-vis Bouguereau or something like that will get you absolutely nowhere, right? So that's a misconception about what a number of people who are working representationally today are actually thinking, is that we're going to bring back the golden age of, that's exactly what I've always loathed, the idea that modernism was a mistake. There's nothing that's been done since modernism that can compare to the greatness of modernism. We're living in a kind of on the raft of the Medusa, with the winds taking us that way and the hope for it that way, I mean, we have to be realistic about this. Nothing has really come, for many different reasons, nothing really has galvanized a set of ideas in postmodernity the way modernism happened. And thinking about why that is incredibly important.
I don't think the style matters. I think that it's if you're being true to your experience. we can tell right away if someone's bored. If you're bored, get out of it. Do something different. Yeah, I mean, you have to keep beginner's mind. So if you can do what you do and you're bored with it, then you're not keeping beginner's mind. You have to always be pushing yourself to be engaged with what the act is that you're doing. So if that's changing the style or doing it differently, or painting like Diebenkorn, or going into something different altogether, making film or something. Do something that pushes you and that you don't know how to do. And that keeps you on the edge and keeps you alive and keeps the work vibrant.
Yeah, and you don't know how to do it.
Right.
You don't know how to do it. It's not as if we're applying, a bag of tricks to making a picture. That's like, there are people who do that, and they suck. Whoa. Did I say that? You know what I mean? We try every day to wake up and push ourselves, fully aware of the fact that we may be tapping into a vein of thought that is pre-modern. Fully aware of that. Accepted. I painted abstractly the whole time I was at the Pennsylvania Academy. I thought the last thing I ever wanted to do was paint representationally. Really, truly. And then I just felt like I hit a brick wall. And I thought everything that I feel is compelling me to put that brush at the next moment within the history of art, is something that I was acquired through an education that I began to become skeptical of. So as a kind of test to myself, I did this giant painting of figures around the deathbed. And I thought, I knew it was going to suck. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But as I did it, I started thinking, there's something in here. There's like the end of the road that I was facing with my pushing expressionist modernism, all of a sudden I found a clearer road ahead of me, or at least a difficult road, but one that was open. And I started to feel like I was a little boy again, infatuated with all the things about art that I loved. There was hope in it, but there was never any desire to return to French academic painting. That's not representation. Goya or Giotto, Cimabue, these are great painters. They drew in very different ways, But this old master, I don't get that. You know what I'm saying?
Margaret Bowen?
Well, I think Margaret had to. Margaret Boland, ladies and gentlemen, also one of the exhibiting artists. Margaret's painting is here, Olympia #1, if you haven't seen it.
Address a couple of questions that have gone out here. To me, one of the things that I'm wondering why we're not talking about is the issue of trusting the concept of narrative. When Diebenkorn was doing what he did, he wasn't inventing. He was having a hard time trusting the ways people have made paintings in the past. When I look at this, Zoey's piece, man, blew my doors off. Because I grew up, just like you did, in a school in which one could not paint the figure. All we were given was the basic position of shapes, movement, structure, and space, though. We were given that. And we were told to trust that and hope for some damn reason we could not, at the end of World War II, trust human beings anymore. So I am wondering right now, thinking about it all the time, aren't we there again? We can't trust narrative. We are hit with 1,000 million stories a day, none of which makes any sense to us. So we literally bombard ourselves against stories. And then when we try to make them up, they seem, damn Zoey, I trust this. Because what I remember, and we were talking about scale in the very beginning, one of the reasons our teachers told us to deal with scale is so we couldn't see it. Now, come on. But we literally couldn't figure it out. So we had to feel our way through both the surface of the painting and what the hell happened. And their whole point was, do not judge that day what happened. A painting is something that happened. Any act of art is something that happened. So the fact of it becoming something in the end that makes some sort of sense. I love what you said, baby, about the idea of the illustrator and somebody coming with it, where you basically you make it so it can't land. That makes sense to me. But when I look around this room and I'm asking about ways that people approach painting, it makes all the sense in the world that the question would be, what is legitimate now? And in terms of feeling your way, I mean, I look at this painting of Zoey's and I can believe in every 4 or 5 inches. And that makes sense to me. Really does. I'm deeply impressed by that damn thing. And it does take me right back to my roots and thinking about, okay, that is a way to sort of start to make your way forward. And I think that is the biggest fact that's important here. In terms of what you were asking about what's appropriate or what can you do or what can't you do, you find that out in needing to do some damn thing. And then don't judge it. You can't judge it. The biggest single need, the one thing the Abex boys said, was the single largest thing you have to figure out how to do is to suspend judgment. Half the reason they were such drunks, they had to turn it off at the end of the day and turn it to the wall so that in the morning there would be a new way of experiencing what the hell they had done. You see what I mean? It had a lot to do with being alive. All right, shut up.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We have to end tonight, but a big thank you to our panelists, Zoey Frank, Bo Bartlett, Amy Sherald, and Vincent Desiderio. And if you haven't, take a good look at this show, please.